He pulled people out from under the ground. He served in a rescue organization. He led an international expedition 300 meters beneath Trieste, and he came back from it alive 11 days before his own death. Patrice Cabanel, 32 years old, one of the strongest cave divers in France, stayed behind in the flooded passage of the Saint-Georges Resurgence, 200 meters from the entrance, on an ordinary training dive where he was the instructor. The people who brought him out were the same ones he had gone on rescues with for years. The technical cause has still not been named. What follows? What has already been confirmed and what remains only a hypothesis. The call reaches the dispatch center shortly after 2 in the afternoon. A Thursday, the end of August. Southwest France, the Lot Department. A limestone plateau above the Dordogne Valley cut through by underground rivers. The call came from the Saint-Georges Resurgence in the commune of Mont-Valon. A resurgence is the point where an underground river comes back out into the open. From the outside, it looks like a calm green bowl of water among the rocks, and there is no way to tell from it what begins further in. The wording that goes out over the service channels is dry and deeply alarming, a level 2 water accident. A cave diver in absolute emergency condition inside a flooded cavity. Translated out of the language of the French rescue services, that means a person is somewhere you cannot simply walk up to. He is not alone. There is a whole group working in the water. An ordinary day of training, a teaching dive. The one who is trapped is the group's instructor, roughly 200 meters from the entrance, in a place where there is no air, no surface, and no way to ascend. Firefighters from the commune of Martel and the departmental rescue service from Gramat head out to the site. They get there quickly, but they run into the obvious. Between them and the man lie 200 meters of water under stone. Standard firefighting equipment cannot work here by definition. They call in the gendarmerie's dive brigade and Spéléo Secours Français, the French cave rescue service, the only organization in the country that routinely works beyond a sump. And this is where the story picks up a second line, a far heavier one. The man the rescuers are driving out to had himself served in that organization for several years. He had gone out with these people on serious call-outs more than once, knew them by name, trained alongside them. His name was Patrice Cabanel. He was 32 years old, and he belonged to a very narrow circle of French divers trusted with work where a mistake leaves no second attempt. Very soon, within a matter of days, he will be underwater again. Not in an Italian shaft, but at home, at the most ordinary training session. To understand how a person ends up at a point like that, you have to rewind about 14 years. Patrice was born in 1992 and grew up in the south of France in the Bouches-du-Rhône department, where Provence runs into the Mediterranean and where under the vineyards and the pine woods lies a mass of limestone riddled with shafts and galleries. He came into caving at exactly 18, not alone, together with his brother Maxime. For local teenagers, this is nothing exotic. The clubs have been running for decades. The nearest cave might be half an hour's drive away, and the barrier to entry is low. First, the usual beginner's route, dry cavities, vertical technique, going down and up a rope in a narrow shaft, helmet, light, cold, clay. But in the Provençal karst, almost any passage sooner or later runs into water. The gallery goes along level, then the ceiling drops, and beyond that, a sump begins. A section completely filled with water from floor to roof. For an ordinary caver, a sump is a wall, the end of the route. For someone who can dive, it is a door. The brothers went through that door fairly quickly. Cave diving in France is a discipline that is tiny in terms of people and enormous in terms of the work it covers. A few hundred active practitioners in the whole country. But they are the ones filling in the blank spots on the maps of underground rivers. Cabanel got into it at a good moment. The equipment already allowed you to pass your first sumps without heroics, as long as you were willing to learn slowly and not cut corners. He learned fast. Almost everyone who worked with him would note that later. An ability to absorb large amounts of information and hand it straight back to other people in a clear, precise form. He did not need to be told twice. The club scene of Provence became his permanent environment, and in that environment, he very soon stopped being the youngest. Those first trips gave him something else as well, an understanding that underwater in a cave there are more rules than in any other part of caving, and that you do not break them at all. Then his biography has a gap that looks strange for a French cave diver. For several years, he goes off to live in Hawaii, the Pacific, warm salt water, no limestone karst, and no sumps in the usual sense. Exactly what he did there is not described in detail in any available source. All that is known is that this period in his life really happened. Coming back to France was the point where he started climbing steeply. He did not return to his old level. He began building up his technical preparation deliberately and hard, putting in hours in cold, fresh water, going to study under recognized cave divers, taking apart piece by piece the things he used to do by the manual. And he took a step that sets him apart from most sportsmen. He took a job at a company that develops rebreathers. A rebreather is a closed-circuit unit. An ordinary scuba set dumps your exhaled breath into the water as bubbles, and the gas supply in the cylinder runs out faster the deeper you are. A rebreather does not dump the exhale. It pushes it through a carbon dioxide absorbent, adds a little oxygen, and gives the diver the same mix back again. The gain is enormous. Instead of tens of minutes, hours of autonomy and underground, where there can be a kilometer of water between you and the way out. That is the difference between an expedition and a stroll. The price is well known too. A rebreather is more complex. It has more points of failure, and most importantly, many of those failures cannot be seen or heard. There are no bubbles, no noise. The person is breathing calmly. Meanwhile, the mix in the loop can drift into dangerous territory, and the only way to spot that is by the instruments and by your own discipline. Working from inside the industry gave Cabanel something an amateur almost never has. He understood the equipment down to the last screw, knew the weak points of the designs, saw how the units behave not in advertising conditions, but in real ones. By the start of the 20s, the roles had changed for good. He was no longer the one asking how to set up his kit before a serious dive. He was the one other people came to with that question. In April 2021, he logs his 1,000th dive. For a man of 28, that is a great deal, and the figure says less about talent than about a way of life. He was underwater constantly. 1,000 dives in caves is not the same as 1,000 dives in the sea. Ordinary sea diving is simple in structure. Whatever happens, there is open water overhead. Your kit fails, your gas runs out, panic sets in, there is an emergency exit upwards, and it works almost every time. In a cave there is rock overhead. There is nowhere to surface. The only way out is the one you came in by meter, back along your own trail. That is why the whole discipline is built around one object, the guideline. It is a thin, strong line that you reel out from the entrance and tie off to projections as you go. The line must not go slack, must not stray off to the side, must not be lost from sight. The diver comes back along it. At junctions, they place markers showing the direction to the exit. It sounds primitive. It works in conditions where everything is against the human being. The floor of many French resurgences is covered in soft clay and silt. One careless movement of a fin or a brush against the ceiling is enough for the sediment to rise and visibility to disappear completely, not to get worse, to disappear. The beam of the lamp hits a white wall 10 centimeters from your mask. Then you go out blind with the line pinched between your fingers. No navigation, no landmarks, only the tension of the line and your own breathing. If the line breaks or you let go of it, you have to search for it by touch, burning gas and time. That is exactly how most of the known accidents in cave diving ended. Cabanel drilled emergency scenarios like this through hundreds of repetitions. He learned to orient himself blind and to act with no time in hand. He did not just know how to do it himself. He set that exercise for others, and it is at that exercise that he will find himself on his last day. From 2019, his club's list of trips stops being a list of training sessions and becomes a list of objectives. September 2019, Patrice Cabanel in the Var department, one of the first genuinely big sumps in his practice. The same year, Alliou in the Pyrenees, a classic site of French underground hydrology, where people go to study how water moves inside a mountain. Then the density increases. August 2020, Trou de Boeuf in the Drôme. March 2021, Ragas in the Var. June 2021, the Frochet Cave, the Drôme again. September of the same year, Fou de Nant. Between the big trips there are the regular sites, the Saint-Philippe Spring, the Araignée Cave, the Espoir Shaft in the La Luire Cave, the Thai Cave. The fifth sump of the Wrestle Resurgence deserves a mention of its own. Wrestle is a famous French system where the sumps run in a chain one after another, and to reach the fifth, you have to pass the previous four with a full load of cylinders. Places like that are used as a proving ground for long pushes. What gets tested there is not courage but logistics. How much gas to stage at the intermediate points, where to leave a spare unit, how to calculate decompression on the way back. That is exactly where the difference lies between a beautiful photograph and actual work. Every dive like that means several days of preparation, tens of kilograms of equipment that has to be carried down to the water by hand, and hard arithmetic in which every possible failure has to have an answer prepared in advance. The geography of his trip spreads across the whole country. The Var, the Drôme, the Lot, the Pyrenees, the Mediterranean coast. He dives in places with different water, different temperatures, different geology, and that is part of the growth too. A cave diver who knows only one system is weak. Someone who has dived in 20 reads an unfamiliar cave far faster. By 2021, he is no longer a name on a participant's list. He is invited where a result is needed, not a report on an attempt. And the invitations come not from individual French clubs, but from teams assembled for a specific task. Alongside his own expeditions, he carried another role for several years, one far less visible from the outside. Cabanel was a member of Spéléo Secours Français, the French cave rescue service. It is set up in a way that is unfamiliar to an outsider. It is not a state unit with salaries and a barracks. It is a body of volunteers recognized by the authorities. Active cavers whom the prefecture calls out when something has happened underground. A trapped group, a flood pulse, an injury at depth, a missing person. The service works free of charge, calls come in at any hour of the day or night, and on a serious operation, dozens of people end up underground at the same time. The underwater part of that work is the narrowest speciality of all. There are only a handful of rescuers in the country capable of going beyond a sump in an emergency. The reason is simple. To pull someone out from behind a flooded section, you have to be a high-level cave diver yourself, and people like that are few by definition. Cabanel went through difficult search and rescue operations with this service, which is to say he was not in reserve, he was out on call-outs. He met his support team at an exercise at Saint-Cassien. That is how it works. Rescue training is also a way of gathering the people who will later be able to work as a unit. He became a partner on diver support and stayed in that role for a long time. His partners remembered specific things. He prepared training sessions in advance rather than on the fly. He debriefed them afterwards down to the details. He knew how to gather people around him and connect them to each other. In the small world of cave diving, that ability was valued no less than personal skill. And one more detail that will sound bitter later. He was particularly valued for the quality of his work with young people and with trainees. He could explain something complicated so that a beginner understood it the first time, and he did it willingly. In the community, a short description stuck to him. The man who goes where others are not able to go, and at the same time, the one you call when something has gone wrong for someone else. By the middle of the 20s, he had accumulated so many official roles that they have to be set out as a list. He becomes an instructor at the French School of Cave Diving, the École Française de Plongée Souterraine, UFPS for short. The school operates under the Fédération Française de Spéléologie and defines how people in France are taught to dive in caves at all. Syllabuses, levels, requirements for instructors. Training here is also tied to the second federation, the one for underwater sports, FFES-SM, because cave diving formally sits at the junction of two worlds. According to his own club, he went on to head the Federal Commission for Cave Diving, meaning he was now responsible not for an individual course, but for the whole discipline on a national scale. In 2024, he joined the board of the SCPA Escandao Club, representing precisely the underwater side of the work there. But the most curious thing in his biography is not the voluntary posts, it is his profession. Cabanel worked at DRASSM, the French State Underwater Archaeology Service. It is a rare organization. It deals with submerged monuments, ancient shipwrecks, sites on the seabed and in caves. He held the post of head of hyperbaric operations there, the person responsible for the safety of the whole team's diving, gases, schedules, decompression, clearances. Within DRASSM's remit, there is one site that resonates especially in this story. the Cosquer Cave near Marseille, a cave with prehistoric paintings whose only entrance lies at depth underwater, and you can get inside only by passing through a long, flooded tunnel. Work there has been going on for decades and demands exactly the set of skills Cabanel had. It makes for a picture that is rare in this niche. Most strong cave divers are people with ordinary professions who dive at weekends and on holiday. For him, diving was a passion, voluntary work, and a way of earning a living all at the same time. He was underwater more often than most of his colleagues and in more controlled conditions. Statistically, in terms of risk, that should have worked in his favor. In the summer of 2022, he leaves France for the karst plateau above Trieste on the border of Italy and Slovenia. The objective is called the Abisso di Trebiciano, the Trebiciano Shaft. It is a place with an unusual history. In the middle of the 19th century, Trieste was short of water, and the city authorities paid for work to find an underground river. Men drove a shaft into the rock by hand for years, going deeper and deeper. More than 300 meters down, they broke into an enormous chamber, and along its floor, a river really was flowing. The river is called the Timavo. It goes underground in Slovenia, disappears from the surface entirely, crosses tens of kilometers under the rock, and comes back into the light in Italy, near the Adriatic. Most of its underground course has still not been explored. People see the river at the few points where they have managed to dig down to it, but what happens between those points is a question with no answer. The only way to find out is to dive. And this is a dive of a special class. First, you have to descend more than 300 meters vertically inside the mountain, hauling cylinders and units down with you, and only then do you get into the water. On the 16th of August, 2022, Patrice Cabanel and his partner Michael Phillips go into the bottom sump of Trebiciano at a depth of about 330 meters below the surface. They pass roughly 200 meters of flooded galleries and surface. They surface in a chamber no one had ever seen, about 160 meters long, 50 wide, 60 high, bigger than a football pitch, with a ceiling as high as a 20-story building. The chamber was named the Mucci Cavern, after the diver who had tried to work out the route of the Timavo back in the 1950s. After that discovery, Trebiciano once again became the deepest cave of the Trieste karst, and Cabanel now had a goal he would keep coming back to follow the underground course of the Timavo all the way through. The Italian find was not a stopping point for him, rather the opposite. The next 2 years run very densely for Cabanel. In July 2022, he works at the Marchepied Emergence. That is the lot department, the same karst above the Dordogne where he will die 2 years later. In the same period, he goes into the Sabre network in the Var, and in August he turns up at the Born Emergence in the Drôme. The summer of 2023, Cholet in the Drôme, and Port-Mieux near Cassis. Port-Mieux is a site of a special kind. It is an underground river that flows through the limestone along the coast and empties straight into the sea, below water level. Its fresh water mixes with salt water, and people have been trying to unravel that system since the middle of the 20th century. Somewhere deep in the karst, there is a large freshwater aquifer, and nobody knows how big it is. In October 2023, he dives at Bestouan, the second major underwater spring on that same stretch of coast. Work in these places connected him with the Rivières Mystérieuses Association of Cassis, which has spent decades investigating the underwater systems of the Provence coast. This is no longer sport, and it is not adventure. It is hydrogeology, surveying, mapping. In the autumn of 2023, Font Estremar appears in this story. In the Eastern Pyrenees, the deepest known spring in France and the site of world depth records. On the 3rd of November, the Marseille diver Frédéric Swierczynski went down to 308 meters here and set another world record. Cabanel's club was out at that spring in the same period. In those same years, Cabanel took part in the making of a short film about cave diving. He was among the people showing this closed discipline to those outside it. The people around him would note one thing in common afterwards. His diary was packed with plans years ahead. Projects, expeditions, courses, filming. He was not intending to stop or to ease off. The last summer of his life looks like the schedule of a man living in 3 countries at once. In July 2024, he dives at Baume des Anges in the Drôme, another French site, another sump. In August, he is already in Croatia, on the Biokovo Massif above the Adriatic, in the Njemica Shaft. That is a vertical system almost a kilometer deep, one of the deepest in the country. First a descent lasting several days down a cascade of pitches with loads, then a sump at the bottom. Trips like that need a team of several dozen people just to get the equipment down. On the 11th of August 2024, the 9th expedition under the name Timavo System Exploration starts in Italy, a continuation of the very work that began at Trebiciano. Cabanel leads its French contingent. The lineup, 7 divers, 5 of whom go into the water, while 2 stay on support at the bottom of the shaft, more than 300 meters down. The logistics are run by the Adriatic Speleological Society of Trieste. Cavers from Italian and Slovenian clubs help out. Their job is to move heavy equipment vertically, which is brutally hard physical work in itself. The divers do 2 dives a day. The result of the week: beyond the Mauchi Cavern, the team pushes about another 300 meters deeper into the system, to the junction with the Luftloch Cave, the other point where people have reached the Timavo. There remains some 200 meters of unexplored channel. Close that. And you get a single underground route more than 2 kilometers long along a river no one has ever seen in its entirety. On the 17th of August, the expedition is wound up. They strip out the equipment, haul it to the surface, put up a commemorative plaque marking the discovery of 2022, and have dinner together. On the 18th of August, Cabanel leaves Trieste. He comes home alive and well after one of the most complex underground undertakings carried out anywhere in Europe. Ahead of him lies an ordinary working autumn. The place where it will all end has nothing in common with the Italian shaft. Saint-Georges is not an expedition target at the edge of the known world. It is a well-known, well-used site in the Dordogne Valley, in the Lot department, where French clubs have been coming for decades. From the outside, it looks unremarkable. A broad bowl of water about 30 meters across, green and calm among rocks and vegetation. You can park a few steps from the bank, a rare luxury in cave diving, where the equipment is usually carried on your back for hours. Here, the cylinders are simply moved from the car boot to the water. At the same time, Saint-Georges is a site with a great deal of history. It is the main active outlet of the river that flows through the Padirac shaft, one of the most famous caves in France. Edouard Alfred Martel, the man called the founder of European caving, predicted back at the end of the 19th century that one day explorers would follow that channel underground and come out right here. He turned out to be right, but the wait was more than a century. The connection between the two systems was proved in 2003 by the British cave diver Rick Stanton, the same man whose name the whole world would later learn from the rescue operation in the Thai cave. He made it through between the far sump of Saint-Georges and the sump on the Padirac side. Beyond the pool runs a long chain of sumps going tens of meters down, with zones where you need rebreathers, diver propulsion vehicles, and hours of decompression. But training dives take place at the very beginning of that chain, in a section people visit regularly and where there is nothing exceptional. And yet, the water of Saint-Georges is deceptive. The entrance to the flooded passage is narrow. Even experienced divers with compactly stowed kit note that in there you will be rubbing against the rock. The floor is covered in sticky clay. A few careless movements are enough to turn clear water into an impenetrable cloud almost instantly. On the 29th of August 2024, Patrice Cabanel comes here to work, not to explore, not to look for a continuation, not to set a record. He is running a training dive, and in it, he is in the role of instructor. 11 days have passed between that day and his return from Trieste. A man who not long before had been leading an international expedition more than 300 meters underground is running a session at a site French divers come to as a training ground. With him is the whole group he is leading. The instructor's role in a setup like that is clear to anyone who has ever taught. He is not the first one out into the unknown. He is alongside, monitoring, backing up, demonstrating, stepping in when necessary. The load for everyone else rests on him. He has to keep watch on himself, on the students, and on the situation all at the same time. At around 2 in the afternoon, the dive stops being a training dive. This is the very call our story began with. Only now we are hearing it from the inside, in detail. Cabanel ends up trapped in the flooded passage, roughly 200 meters from the entrance. The alarm is raised almost immediately, and it reaches the services within the first minutes. What exactly happened underwater in those minutes has not been set out publicly by any agency. Neither the rescuers, nor the investigation, nor the federations have described the sequence of events. How he came to be trapped, what preceded it, who noticed it, and at what moment. All that is known is the location, the time, and the outcome. Something else is clear, and it needs no official confirmation. 200 meters of flooded passage is a distance that cannot be covered quickly under any circumstances. Even a trained diver with a full set of kit needs time for the way in and the way back, and the way back is limited by the supply of breathing gas. Over a distance like that, help could not physically have arrived within minutes, and in cave diving, minutes are the whole of the quantity available. Meanwhile, it is getting crowded around the green pool. Vehicles pull up, equipment is set out, the people called out on the alert gather, the firefighters and the rescue service, the same ones who came out on the first call, get there quickly. The road here is short and you can drive right up to the water, but in front of them is a wall you cannot see and cannot break through. Standard firefighting equipment cannot function here in principle. What is needed is people who can dive underground with their own kit, their own cylinders, and their own qualifications. People like that are called out separately, and they do not get there in minutes. Next, the call goes out to those who can work specifically beyond a sump. The gendarmerie dive brigade from Marseille and Spéléo Secours Français. Everything that happens after that is governed by a protocol that cannot be broken even for the sake of speed. Staging the cylinders along the route, moving strictly along the guideline, calculating the time at depth. Decompression stops on the way back. These cannot be given up, however much you want to get out faster, otherwise the rescuers become a second accident. That is exactly why operations like this are measured not in minutes, but in days. Each entry inside is short, and the preparation for it is long. There is also a side of it that does not go into the reports. The people going into the water now knew the man they were going in for. Many of them had worked shoulder to shoulder with him more than once on real call-outs, and had been through the same training scenarios. The rescue community in France is small, and its underwater part is smaller still. Working like that is hard physically, and harder still as a human being. The operation continues the next day. On the 30th of August, at around 4:30 in the afternoon, Patrice Cabanel was brought to the surface. The investigation into the circumstances was assigned to the gendarmerie of the Lot department. As a formal matter, this is standard procedure. Any death in circumstances like these in France triggers an inquiry, regardless of whether there are grounds to suspect anyone of wrongdoing. From that moment, the story moves out of the rescue phase and into another one, into the attempt to understand what actually happened in that flooded passage on that Thursday. There is still no answer to that question, and this has to be said plainly without trying to fill the emptiness with a neat theory. Only a little has been officially established: the location, the distance from the entrance, the time of day, the nature of the outing, a training dive, and the role of the man who died, instructor. The technical cause of what happened has not been officially established by the prosecutor's office, by the gendarmerie, or by the federations. What exactly failed and what went wrong is not known, and no official reconstruction of the events has been published. The only mention of a specific line of inquiry came from an Italian publication, which wrote about a malfunction of the breathing unit as a possibility under consideration. This is the only source, and it has not been confirmed by the French authorities or by the investigation. It cannot be treated as an established fact. Within the community itself, people discuss the standard set of reasons why accidents like this happen in cave diving at all. Equipment failure, loss of the guideline and stirred up silt, a problem with the quality of the breathing gas, a sudden medical episode underwater. All four scenarios are real and are known from other cases. But as applied to the 29th of August 2024, not one of them is confirmed by any documents. These are hypotheses, and they should sound like hypotheses. There is a general pattern here. In cave diving, the exact cause often is not established at all. There are usually no witnesses nearby. Even when a group goes in together, in the silt, people stop seeing each other. The scene itself is destroyed by the recovery operation, and equipment that has spent a long time underwater does not always give unambiguous answers. That is why in many well-known cases, the outcome remains an honest cause not established. Obituaries were published by the Cave Rescue Service, by the Caving Federation, by his club, and by the Underwater Archaeology Service where he worked. Their texts say almost nothing about records. They talk about a man who knew how to explain things and who held people together around him. And they leave behind a contradiction that this story does not resolve. A rescuer of the highest level, who came back alive from Trebiciano, did not come out of the water 200 meters from daylight.